Ukrainian forces have been hit by an artillery attack near the port of Mariupol in the first significant violation of a ceasefire. Palestinian President Abbas threatens to end Palestinian Authority and Hamas unity government. And Chancellor Angela Merkel calls on Germans to oppose and fight anti-Semitism. Good morning, I'm Shachar Peled. You're watching i24 News. Ukrainian government forces came under artillery fire late on Saturday near the strategic port of Mariupol in eastern Ukraine in the first serious violation of a ceasefire declared only about 30 hours earlier. i24 News reporter Ron Friedman has the latest updates.
Loud explosions echoed Saturday night in and around the eastern Ukrainian port city of Mariupol, signaling what many feared to be the early collapse of a fragile truce between Ukraine and pro-Russian rebels. Government forces in the region came under artillery fire, but so far no casualty figures have been released. A checkpoint held by Ukraine loyalists and industrial facilities caught fire from the shelling. Tanks and armored personnel carriers transporting pro-government militia volunteers were seen heading into the city. The renewed violence came just hours after a phone call between Ukraine's President Petro Poroshenko and his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin, who agreed that the ceasefire signed in Belarus on Friday was generally being observed. Even before the late-night incident, residents of the strategic seaside town sounded skeptical that the truce, which calls for gradual troop withdrawal and prisoner exchanges and allows for Russia to send in aid convoys, would hold.
I do not care what they think about it. There will be no ceasefire because they have killed so many of our brothers.
I think everyone wants it, but I hardly believe in it, because these issues, in the condition they are now, cannot be resolved so soon.
The West, for its part, appears hesitant to tread in Moscow's backyard. Though NATO last week agreed to form a rapid response team to deal with such conflicts, and the US and EU are discussing imposing new sanctions on Russia, few see the solution to the crisis emerging from abroad. The coming hours and days will tell whether the overnight shelling constituted the swan song of the month-long conflict or the beginning of a new round of violence.
Now, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas is expected to declare today that he is suspending talks with Hamas until his demands are met, as he threatens to end the unity government. He has also insisted that Hamas cede control of the Gaza Strip to the unity government. Abbas also took an assertive tone against Hamas on Saturday, saying he would no longer allow the organization to make policy decisions like signing agreements or initiating conflicts. Speaking from Cairo, where he's meeting with Arab League foreign ministers, Abbas also mocked Hamas for launching thousands of rockets, which did relatively little damage in Israel. And earlier I spoke on the phone with Middle East editor of Israel Public Radio Eran Zinger about the implications of such a break of the unity between the Palestinian Authority and Hamas.
Well, we can definitely say that after the end of the war in Gaza, we are now seeing the beginning of a new war between Hamas and Fatah, especially after what President Abbas said tonight, that he will not be willing to have any partnership with Hamas if what's going on in Gaza will keep on going the way it is right now. He says, I'm not asking Hamas to give their weapons, but there's no doubt that they cannot be responsible for strategic decisions like making war or making peace. He is accusing Hamas of killing dozens of young Palestinians, especially Fatah Palestinians in Gaza, by executing them during the war in Gaza, during the Israeli operation in Gaza. And he says that everybody agrees today that what happened in Gaza is a humanitarian disaster and Hamas is responsible for it. He's not only talking about Gaza, he's talking about the West Bank. He says, we have indications that Hamas are trying to do the same thing they did in Gaza in the West Bank. In other words, we are now seeing an all-new struggle beginning again between Hamas and Fatah, especially after what happened not only in Gaza, but the West Bank. The whole, let me remind you that this struggle actually began after the kidnapping of the three Israeli boys, these three Israeli youngsters, by Hamas. Hamas in the beginning said that they were not responsible for it, but only 2 weeks ago It was one of Hamas officials, Salah al-Aouri in Turkey, who claimed responsibility. He said, yes, we are responsible for this murder. So this is another indication that Hamas is not willing to have not only peace with Israel, it's not willing to have peace inside the Palestinian Authority or inside the Palestinian territories between Hamas and Fatah.
Now, the 50-day war between Gaza and Israel has created hundreds of new orphans. Now the territory's only orphanage is in a race against time to build new bedrooms for the children who have nowhere else to go. Here's more in the following report.
It was on the last night of Ramadan in July when Amir's childhood was cut short. An Israeli airstrike destroyed his house and killed both of his parents. As the oldest child, he will now have to help bring up his brother and sister, despite the fact he's only 11 years old.
When my father and my mother died, I thought I'd rather die with them than stay alone.
The 50-day war against Israel saw over 2,000 Gazans killed. Nearly a quarter of the victims were children. Families have been ripped apart and hundreds of new orphans created. Bisan is another whose parents and siblings were killed. She will now stay with her older sister.
The worst time is at night. She can't sleep at all. She cries all night long and calls for them. She asks where they are. It's so bad that I've started to dread nightfall.
Some of the orphans will be able to stay with other family members, but others will come here and live out the rest of their childhood at Gaza's only orphanage. Before the war, there were 120 children living here, but now urgent building work is taking place as more than 250 new arrivals are expected in the coming days.
Targeting innocent children affects us, like the child Al-Shanburi. Before, he lost his father. Now he's lost both his father and his mother. We have also the children Aisha and Hiba. They live here at the Institute. They recently lost their mum after having already lost their father. Now they've lost both of them.
The UN says over 350,000 children in Gaza will require psychological support to come to terms with what has happened this summer. Hundreds of children will now spend their lives without the support of one or both of their parents. And the psychological impact of that is almost impossible to measure.
Secretary of State John Kerry discussed on Saturday the Islamic State threat with the head of the Arab League ahead of the group's next round of discussions. The Arab League is due to hold a ministerial meeting in Cairo on Sunday to address fast-moving changes in the region. Kerry and Arab League chief Nabil al-Arabi discussed the need for the Arab League and its members to take a strong position in the coalition that is developing against ISIL, a senior State Department official said. They also spoke of, quote, the importance of decisive action to stop the flow of foreign fighters, counter ISIL's financing and combat its incitement. And German Chancellor Angela Merkel has called on the country's citizens to attend a rally against anti-Semitism next week in Berlin, where she will speak. Merkel said Saturday she will do everything possible to make sure anti-Semitism has no chance in Germany. Her remarks came after recent protests in the country against the Gaza war turned anti-Semitic, with synagogues and Jews being attacked and demonstrators chanting for Jews to be gassed. Merkel said making Jews feel safe remains a top priority for Germany 75 years after it attacked Poland in the run-up to World War II and the killing of 6 million Jews. She expressed worries that Jewish institutions need police protection. And Sierra Leone will go on a countrywide lockdown for 3 days later this month as part of an escalation of efforts to halt the spread of Ebola across the West African country. But medical charity Doctors Without Borders said on Saturday that the measures will not help control the outbreak and could lead to the disease spreading further as cases are concealed. An outbreak first identified in Guinea on March has since spread across much of Liberia and Sierra Leone. Cases have also been registered in Nigeria and Senegal, and the World Health Organization says more than 2,100 people have died thus far from the disease. That's all for now. Join us again in 20 minutes. I'm Shachar Peled. Thank you very much for watching.